Welcome to Why Oh Why, the podcast where we take a look at events that have had an element of mystery, confusion, or misrepresentation. And this episode has plenty of all three. My name's Matt Hartless, I'm a musician and journalist.
My name's AJ Hill, I am a comedian and idiot.
And also a budding civil servant now.
Yeah, we're both.
Can't say that for hell if they listen to it.
We're both civil
servants.
We both work for the government, folks. So you can't trust us.
Yeah. Fucking hell! If there's any, I bet your housemate's gonna listen to this and just go, "Man, they're all in on it."
Yeah, we're definitely all in on it.
So anyway, this week we're going to talk about MH370, the only flight I think that in the history of air travel where as soon as you say the flight number, everyone knows what you're talking about. I think there've been another couple of famous ones. I think United 93, because there was the film made about it. It was one of the 9/11 ones.
Or the Wright brother, number one.
Number one. Yeah, that's true. This is Matt from The Edit. At this point, I asked AJ to give us a brief overview of MH370, but he went on for 10 minutes describing in quite fine detail everything that happened, which I felt was perhaps a bit over the top. All I was really looking for was MH370 was a flight that was supposed to go from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, but it vanished halfway through. And as time went on, it transpired that it had been probably deliberately flown off course to crash somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. Back to the live room. I'm going to go deep into this now.
Excellent.
So
how deep, Matthew?
Well, I'm balls deep. I'm gonna go through this chronologically. So yeah, like you said, it was a Boeing 777, however you say that, flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing.
Either's acceptable.
Yeah, I just couldn't be bothered to say 7 3 times, and then I did it anyway. So yeah, on the 8th of March 2014, at 42 minutes past midnight, it was cleared for takeoff with the captain Zahari Ahmed Shah and the first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid. They were in charge of the airplane. They were flying it. So there was the captain, Captain Shah, he was 53. First officer Hamid was 27. And in a sort of twist of irony, this was, like you referred to earlier, he was about to get married. But also, this was to be his final training flight. Captain Shah was kind of not examining him. It wasn't like a test, but basically he was supposed to, after the flight was completed, recommend him for.
Well, he was an exceptionally experienced pilot, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was an exceptionally experienced pilot, and he was essentially. This was going to be the final flight for First Officer Hamid, being on whatever gradation he was, to the point where he could then take over flights on his own. He could then be a captain of a flight after this flight was completed.
And sadly, it was his final flight.
In addition to those two people, there were also 10 cabin crew and 227 passengers, 153 of which were Chinese, 38 were Malaysians, and the 12 other passengers, they were from other countries. There were a couple of Australians. I think there was somebody from the Netherlands. But yeah, they just a handful of passengers from other countries. At 1:19 a.m., this is Malaysian time. All the times I'll be quoting a Malaysian time, by the way.
Okay.
Kuala Lumpur time. So this is when they last made contact. Now, this is the first sort of sign of something a little strange, is that they confirmed the altitude, which was not something that they needed to do. It's basically, so they got
they confirmed they're at 35,000 feet.
Yeah, they confirmed they were at 35,000 feet, but they'd already reached it. They were just saying we're still flying at 35,000 feet. We're still there, which. You can't really infer anything from that, but it is strange that they did that because that was not something they needed to do. I mean, I suppose...
Was that the co-pilot doing it, though?
It's unclear. I mean...
Because if it's the co-pilot doing it, it just means that he might just be a bit nervous about his final flight before becoming
that's
fledged pilot.
That's entirely possible. It might just be a red herring. So, yeah, at 1:19, they confirmed the altitude. and then we're told that they were going to be passed to Ho Chi Minh City, to which co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid replied, acknowledging that he'd understood and saying the now famous "Good night, Malaysian 370." He was actually supposed to quote the frequency that he was supposed to sign on to for Ho Chi Minh City and didn't. But this might have just been a mistake rather than, again, if it was Hamid who was flying and he was being tested and he was a bit nervous, he might have just forgotten to say the frequency. It's
the kind of thing, like, we've all done exams and we've all done sort of things that are meant to be like, if you do this, then you're going to pass, and that's the, we've all done job interviews. Essentially, it's a job practical exam, isn't it? So
yeah. It's basically the equivalent of showing you're working. Like, if you know the answer, you don't feel like you need to show you're working. You might forget.
So we can forgive him, but yes, interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, at 22 minutes past 1, the flight disappears from radar screens. Now, what you need to know about air travel, commercial air travel, is that there are two different ways in which it can appear on radar screens. There's primary and secondary. Primary radar is what the military use. That's just based on reflectance. So it's kind of echolocation kind of thing. You send a signal out, you measure the time it takes to be reflected to you, and then you can tell how far away that thing is from you. Then there's secondary radar, which is what commercial flights use, and that's assessed by the transponders on the plane. So they will send more detailed information as to exactly where they are and exactly their flight path and what they're doing.
Right.
It was secondary radar that MH370 disappeared from.
Okay.
That was the transponder which sends that information. That was turned off. Now, so in Ho Chi Minh City, they were expecting MH370 to contact them, and instead they just vanished from their radar.
And I know that it took them about 20 minutes to
It took them 18. It took them 18 minutes. Now, protocol in this circumstance says that they should have let the previous air traffic control, they should have let them know within 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
5 minutes, yeah. So
do we know what caused the delay?
Incompetence, basically. Not that I'm saying that the people who work at air traffic control in Ho Chi Minh City are incompetent, but they just didn't follow protocol. They didn't know what was happening, didn't know how serious it was, and were just a bit confused, and so neglected to tell Kuala Lumpur air control for a while, just because they weren't sure if anything was bad or not. But that's kind of the first point at which mistakes from people on the ground have led to this being an even greater mystery. This is when they're starting to realise there's something seriously wrong here. This plane has just vanished. So, do you remember in 2009? Do you remember Air France Flight 447?
I do remember that. Yes.
Yeah, I remember it because it was around the same time that Lost was on the TV, and it was very much like Lost. Basically, what happened was this particular flight was a flight from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil to Paris in France. But I mean,
those are two places.
Those are the obvious locations for those cities. Basically, it over the Atlantic Ocean, it flew into a thunderstorm and didn't come out the other side.
Okay.
And because the Atlantic Ocean is quite big and there aren't much in the way of islands in between, they weren't on any sort of radar because there's nothing there to do that kind of check. So it was just, we'll see when you get towards Europe. It actually took 2 years to find the wreckage of that crash, even though they started finding debris fairly soon afterwards, so they could confirm that it had crashed into the ocean. But they found the full wreckage of the plane 2 years later with the black boxes.
Was the fuselage completely intact?
The fuselage was more or less intact, yeah. Because what had happened was that they'd been flying into the storm cloud. The pilots, some of whom were a little inexperienced, and the captain of the flight had gone to have a sleep, which is
captain.
normal.
Yeah, they do that. It sounds terrifying, doesn't it? The captain's just gone for a sleep. Well, the drivers just had a nap. Michael Knight from Knight Rider, which if you're my age, that makes perfect sense, and if you're not, it's an 80s TV show where the guy had a car which he could fall asleep with. While it drove himself. Kit was the onboard computer. Basically, all planes have a kit on board that can fly the plane without you actually,
Exactly, yeah. So autopilot.
Autopilot, that's what it's
called.
So
the two remaining pilots of this Air France flight didn't need to do anything, but because of the because of the thunderstorm, because of the turbulence, they kept flying the plane. And it turned out what had happened was that they'd unknowingly stalled the plane. And so they were trying to bring it out of a stall in a way that they've been trained to do. But because of a bit of information about how the plane worked and how to get out of a stall that hadn't quite been communicated across. And these pilots weren't the only ones that this happened to. It happened on a training flight as well. At some point when they were trying to deliberately stall the plane to then bring it out of a stall to test it and just crashed it because the way to bring it out of a stall didn't work. So basically what happened is that the pilots didn't have all the information they needed to be able to fly the plane, tried to take evasive action so that they weren't damaged by the thunderstorm, and by doing so unintentionally stalled the plane and just crashed into the ocean. And they were unable to communicate with anyone because they weren't in the range of air traffic control. And so at that point it was theorised, well, there is this small sort of grey area where you might not quite appear on air traffic control.
Okay.
Between Malaysia and Vietnam. So it was theorised at that point that maybe a similar thing has happened to this aircraft, and they've just gone down into the sea before they could get in contact with Ho Chi Minh City.
That would be the South China Sea.
The South China Sea, indeed. However, as you alluded to before, they were observed on military radar. Now, I've got down here that they were observed until 1:53 on military radar. I think maybe the differences between the times that we gave was that 1:53, that was the last time that was confirmed to be MH370. There were later planes showed up on radar, but they're not sure if it was MH370 or not.
I will confess that my timeline is from a free book that I got from Kindle by Sylvia Wrigley. So if my timelines are not correct, Sylvia Wrigley is to blame. It's a good book, though. Do read it. But Sylvia Wrigley! Roar!
The plane did some pretty interesting turns at this point after the transponder was turned off. So there was a small turn to the right. Sorry, there was a small bank to the right just after the transponder had turned off, and then a sharp turn to the left.
Well, so
it almost turns completely back on itself.
So this is one of the interesting things that I found about what people were saying where the plane is concerned. It's like not only was the person in charge of the plane at this point, whoever that might be, not only was the person in charge of the plane at this point able to fly a commercial plane, but they were also able to fly a commercial plane aggressively and well, which is not a standard thing. Obviously, like with a fighter jet, it's kind of quite a small body, whereas a Boeing 777 is a massive plane, and it's not very easy to go, right, we're just going to absolutely ramp this thing left, we're going to ramp this thing right, we're going to do a loop-to-loop. You can't, it's not the easiest thing to sort of pull maneuvers with.
And furthering on from that, it was these turns could not have been performed by an autopilot. It had to have been under manual control during this specific turn.
Well, this is it. So with regards to when it was flying over the South Indian Ocean, it's pretty much, according to Inmarsat data, which isn't that reliable, dear listener, straight. It's fairly straight. So at this point, autopilots can't do that. They're not like Kit from the TV show Knight Rider.
Yeah. You got to keep bringing Kit up throughout the whole thing.
A little bit.
Yeah, so there was that big turn left.
Yeah.
And then there was a small turn right once they got into the Strait of Malacca.
Okay.
And that was over the island of it wasn't over the island of Penang. It was around the island of Penang. So the plane was sort of arcing around it, as if looking at it. And we'll get back to that later. Stick a pin in that. That might be important. And also what was captured on military radar was that the altitude fluctuated wildly. Now, this was a very interesting point at the time and has since been kind of assumed that whatever equipment was being used to monitor this plane was faulty rather than the plane itself. And that's because the differences in altitude that were recorded were impossible for a plane to have completed. Like they've tried it. Obviously, I haven't tried it in real life because they'd die. But they've tried it on flight simulators since and have not been able to replicate it.
So from things that I have heard, so this is the point that the information that you've received is different to the point that I've received. So at the point that you're talking about, I have heard that the plane was lifted to 45,000 feet. So that's a whole, and the highest operational model that the plane can normally fly is 43,000 feet.
Yes, yeah, that was what I was about to say.
So it's taken to 45,000 feet and then brought down again. Now, there are certain theories as to why someone would do this, and one of those is literally to cause hypoxia on the plane and kill everybody other than yourself.
So the plane would decompress. I mean, according to the same the same data, it managed to reach altitudes of 58,000 feet at times, which is 15,000 feet above its operational capacity.
Yeah,
then after it reached that peak, it then dived to about to a couple of thousand feet within a minute, which is basically impossible.
It
can't be done. Like if the pilot had indeed, whoever was flying the plane had indeed done that at that point, it would have crashed.
Yeah, I was going to say, it is possible to do that, but the plane would have crashed into the ocean.
Yeah. There's no way you can recover from a dive like that. I did want to talk about, because I mentioned before why the military didn't reveal their data for quite a while.
That's a good question,
and it's a really mundane answer.
So I want to know this because I've been thinking about this, right? Because there's a documentary by the Australians. I can't do an Australian accent.
Well, I can do a bit of a better one, but we'll get into that later.
So the reporter was quite abrupt with the defence minister, Hishamuddin Hussain. Hishamuddin Hussain. Where is it?
Plane?
Where is it?
Where's the bloody plane, mate?
So she got an exclusive. So to be fair to them, they got an exclusive interview with him, and he sat down with them, which is very generous of him. Because she started asking questions during a press conference, and they were like, "The press conference is over, but afterwards I'll speak to you." Basically, they sat down with Hishamuddin Hussain, and they asked him why, when it passed over the military base Butterworth, why they hadn't sort of sent up planes or tried to take it down and tried to crack it down. And he'd said, well, we don't take it down because, we're not the Americans, which I thought was an amazing dig. I was like, yeah, that's perfect.
I'm straight.
Yeah. But also, I've got some theories about what he meant by that. But yeah,
the reason they didn't reveal that they'd picked up an unidentified aircraft on military radar for quite some time, when it would have been very helpful when they were starting to look for the plane. For example, they were looking in the South China Sea, and the military already knew that it had gone elsewhere. When they did that, they were not wanting to give that data to anyone because it was a multinational investigation. And
so there were at least five nationalities involved in this.
So the Malaysian military didn't want to reveal their radar, their sort of surveilling capacity to the other countries involved in the investigation, and they only did so once it became obvious that they couldn't get away with hiding it anymore.
So this is a thing actually. It's not just Malaysians. So there's lots of questions about this because obviously it flew between a lot of countries along the border, which is called a dead zone. So it flew along a dead zone at one point where it was pinging off all kinds of radars, and a lot of people from all these different nationalities were like, well, we don't know exactly where it was and we don't know who it was because, yes, they're all playing with, we don't want to let you know what our military capabilities are. So that is it's an interesting and awful fact about the nature of the world that we live in.
What I was about to say is that it's a really sad state of affairs for humanity that a tragedy like this happens. We're too I don't want them to get I don't want this other country to get an advantage on me by knowing what cards I hold. It's just seriously.
There are people missing. Yeah, I know, but shh, don't ask me questions.
Boys and their toys. They didn't not try to contact it.
Okay, so in 2015, so just before you say that, in 2015 I saw a documentary, Lost MH370. They don't say that they didn't try and contact it. They don't say that. They just say, "Oh, we just monitored it flying overhead." So that's the information that I've got. So what was their 6 years on? What was their official declaration on that?
So this was something that I didn't know before I started researching this, which is that at 1:30 in the morning, so that's 8 minutes after the transponder's been turned off.
Sure.
It had been picked up on military radar. They'd contacted another plane that was flying nearby and said, "Can you try and get in touch with this?" It's
MH370.
with MH. I don't know if they knew it was MH370 or not, but there's a plane gone missing off radar, but we've picked up this thing on military radar. Can you try and get in touch with it? And so I couldn't find out which plane it was. I suppose if I just kept quoting flight numbers just to get very dry very quickly. But at 1:30, another plane radioed the cockpit of MH370, and the radio transmission was picked up, but all they heard was, quote, mumbling and static.
Interesting.
So somebody accepted the transmission and replied to it. But whatever they said, if they were indeed talking to the other aircraft at all, was not picked up.
So I suppose at that point we're getting into what could have caused the plane to do certain things. So what time was that transmission was picked up?
That was at 1:30 a.m.
1:30. So
yeah, before we go any further,
right.
I'm going to talk about another legacy air crash investigation. Do you remember Helios Flight 522?
No, I've heard of it, but which one was that again?
Okay, so that was... I mean, I remember this at the time very clearly because it departed from Larnaca in Cyprus. This was the 14th of August 2005.
2005,
Now, the reason that I remember this is that some of my family are Cypriot, so I've been to Cyprus quite a few times.
Okay.
I can't remember if I'd been there that year or that recently, but it was the kind of thing where it was just like, that could have been me on that plane. Had I been there at that time, maybe I'd have got... obviously I wouldn't have been going to Prague because...
Why would you not... Hey, hang on. Why would you not have been going to Prague, Matthew?
Well, because
of Helios.
Because at that time I was 12 years old and didn't really have any say on where we went.
Hey, when you're 12, booze and prostitutes sounds pretty good to me, but God.
Basically, they took off from Larnaca Airport in Cyprus, started getting confused about a warning of something.
What was the warning?
Well, they weren't sure. They didn't understand what was happening.
So they just had a warning?
Yeah, they had a warning. They didn't understand what it was, and then they just stopped communicating.
Right.
Some military jets were then scrambled to go and track it down, and they found it just flying on autopilot.
Just flying. It was just doing loops over hillsides in Greece.
No. It wasn't doing loops. It was just flying in a straight line. Okay. It was just. It was what's known as a ghost plane. It wasn't being flown by anyone.
It was just on autopilot.
It was just on autopilot. Yeah, basically. Yeah, it was just on autopilot, just flying in a straight line. Okay. And it because it was only supposed to be a short flight, it didn't have that much fuel, and it ran out of fuel and just crashed into the side of the mountain. Part of it. Everyone died. They found what had happened.
Everyone died.
Well, yeah, it's hilarious this episode.
It's not hilarious. It's just this doesn't... Everyone... Yeah, we're talking about deaths of, aviation passengers. Apologies to everybody.
Well, it turned out what happened on this flight was that the... basically, Helios Airlines, they were like a cheap airline, and they just hadn't done due diligence on...
Not cheap, budget airline, come on.
Budget airline.
As you and I well know, budget airlines are good airlines for people like us who need budget airlines.
Indeed. But, they've been taking budget to a whole new level because they hadn't even bothered to do the safety checks properly. So what had happened was that somebody had come along to check the plane... and check like the pressurization mechanism.
Sure.
And turned it from automatic to manual so that they could do the tests.
Yep.
And then they forgot to change it back to automatic, which the pilots were expecting because they weren't paid to pressurize a plane manually.
So everybody died of hypoxia, basically.
Yeah, everybody. So yeah, they took off. The plane didn't pressurize, and everyone just. Basically suffocated until they became unconscious, and then that's why the plane was just flying itself for ages.
So this is one of the theories about MH370, then, isn't it? That basically the idea that either there was a problem with the cabin or that it was a deliberate thing by whoever was controlling the plane.
Yeah. So they
depressurized
the evidence to suggest that there might have been a depressurization would be the erratic movements of the plane. And the mumbling heard by the plane that tried to contact it. Okay. It could just be that the pilots suffering from oxygen starvation are getting really, really confused and just don't know what they're doing.
However, I'm going to say though, so what time was that the mumbling was heard?
1:30.
1:30. So the mumbling was heard at 1:30. It flies over a military base at about 2:14 or around that time, somewhere between 1:30 and 2:30, and then it starts hanging a right.
Yeah.
So from what I understand,
from information that has come further along, it's pretty clear that this isn't what happened.
Okay.
But that was kind of the assumption they were working to at that time.
Well, however, there is a theory that possibly one of the pilots asked the other pilot to leave the cockpit to get a coffee. So, for example...
Yeah. We'll get onto that. We'll get onto that later.
Will you?
Like, that's basically... I've got a whole 2-page spread on
coffees and... and cockpits. Okay.
So yeah, until 1:53, it was observed on military radar, and then it disappeared over the Strait of Malacca, which is basically, if you think in terms of a globe, you've got the Malaysian peninsula, you've got Thailand, which sort of connects to that, and it's to the west of that, like so the top right of the Indian Ocean. That's where that is. 10 minutes before that, you talked about the Inmarsat thing.
Yeah.
So that was initially turned off along with the transponder, or at least that's how it appeared. However, at 43 minutes past 1 in the morning,
Okay.
which is an hour and 1 minute after the plane was cleared for takeoff.
Yes.
I don't know why I felt the need to stress that.
Are your notes worse than mine this week? Is that what's happening? Yeah.
It sounds like it. So yeah, at 1:43, the satellite link to the Inmarsat system was re-established. So it sounds like some systems have turned back on, perhaps so that the plane could be flown on autopilot again.
Ah, okay.
So
that would make sense.
So yeah, they noticed when this happened. So they actually tried to call the cockpit at 1:57 a.m.
I did not know that.
So
okay.
This is only 14 minutes after it's been turned back on.
Yeah,
it's only 35 minutes after the transponder's been turned off that they tried to call the cockpit. And so the call was routed to a phone in the cockpit, which rang. So there was a phone to ring, but it wasn't answered.
No.
So this is what they were doing at the time.
Right.
On the 11th of March, they'd had time to analyse a lot of the data that they collected. Like they knew the plane was still in the air according to their data, but they didn't understand what the data meant. So they had to go through it and analyse it and go, where could it be? What was it doing? On the 11th of March, they managed to analyse the data enough that they could then give this information over to the investigators.
Sure.
And it suggested that the plane changed heading. They don't know which direction.
Right.
They just know that there was a significant direction change to the aircraft. That's what the Inmarsat data picked up.
Okay.
At a certain point in time, which meant that they could plot vaguely, not knowing which direction it had turned, they could plot vaguely in terms of like spheres where it could have gone from the point at which that turn was made based on fuel consumption and speed. So they found out that it had flown for nearly 7 hours after it had disappeared from radar.
Yeah, so that makes sense because MH370 had 8 hours worth of fuel on board. So that it disappeared about 40 minutes after. It turned its transponder off 40 minutes after takeoff. So we're talking about. So
it had the capacity to fly for a much longer time. If you don't know too much about air travel, the reason that they do this is obviously because if your flight is delayed, i.e., you're flying to an airport, something happens at the airport, which means that you can't land because there's other planes in the way, you're going to have a fair amount of reserve fuel so that you don't just fall out the sky.
Yep.
And so with the Inmarsat data, they are assuming because it didn't turn up on any of the radars that it then turned left. It turned to the south.
Yep.
And then flew in a straight line over the southern Indian Ocean, which is very, very remote.
We should talk about the southern Indian Ocean. We definitely should talk about that.
So to get an idea of how remote it is, after they announced this on the 11th of November that this might be where the plane was heading. So
when 11th of November when?
Sorry, 11th of March is what I meant, not the 11th. Okay. That's my birthday.
Yeah, it's your birthday. I was like, they announced on Matthew Hartless's birthday that they. Hey Matt, I know you like mysteries around aviation. Did you know that MH370 flew over the Indian Ocean? I didn't know that, guys. That's the best birthday present ever.
Yeah, no, that was a slip of the tongue from me. So on the 11th of March, Inmarsat produced this data.
Yes.
And after that point, they then created arcs of where the final transmission, the one which they predicted might have been because the fuel had ran out. They then produced arcs as to where this plane might have been at that time, and with the Southern Indian Ocean hypothesis, they then drew up an area which it might have landed had it done that.
Indian Ocean hypothesis.
Yeah, and like when you look at a world map, it doesn't look like it's that far away from anything. But even knowing exactly where to go, it took investigators 6 days to get there. So, hello again. Things might sound a little different now because AJ has bought himself a new microphone.
Yes, hello.
And the reason that he has had the opportunity to do that is because when we tried to record the first time, we got too drunk after the point you've just heard and started shouting over each other all the time, and it sounds absolute wank. So we will carry on as we were, completely sober. We just talked about the Inmarsat data. Now the flaperon, this is going forward about a year and a half into the future. So in summer 2015, the flaperon, which is a part of a plane wing, that washed up on Reunion Island.
So if you want to know what a flaperon is, when you are on takeoff, you can see the flaperon extend out of the plane wing, and then it retracts when the plane's landing. Is that correct, or in flight?
I think it's the opposite way round.
Opposite way around, yes.
So I think you extend it during takeoff and landing because it affects lift and drag and things like that. And obviously you want drag when you're landing, and you want lift when you're taking off. And so that because it will then can cause problems mid-flight if it's extended, if there's turbulence or something. So that's why it's retracted during the flight. Is, to the best of my understanding, what it's for. So yeah, that piece of the plane washed up on Reunion Island in 2015. Well, I don't know if it washed up, but presumably it did. It was found in 2015. But yeah, so it probably washed up not too long before they found it. Now, the way that it was basically found in just one whole piece, the flaperon, which on the ABC documentary that we have mentioned a couple of times, they did this experiment to show how something made of this metal could be sheared off in one piece. And through the way they found it, they found that it had to enter the water at a very specific angle, so either vertically or practically horizontally, which means that the autopilot, when the plane ran out of fuel, would not have done that. It would have just sort of semi-glided and then just hit the ocean. So when they found this, it did suggest that somebody was still flying the plane at the end, so have either brought it into a controlled glide.
It's probably better to say that it's unlikely that the plane, if the autopilot was on the plane, wouldn't sort of go like that, because things can malfunction.
Go like what, AJ? Remember, they can't see
us.
Yeah,
they can't see it. I'm pointing downwards towards the floor, towards the carpet. We have a carpet here, but in the Indian Ocean, they have water. Yeah. So if it was going down, vertically, it's very unlikely that it would, the autopilot would have it going vertically in a dive bombing motion. It would
quite. I mean, as things started going offline, the plane would sort of just turn a bit with wind direction. It wouldn't be able to glide as long as if somebody were controlling it, keeping it straight. However, it wouldn't also automatically it's not like you just flick a switch and it just goes and just falls out of the sky. From the way the flaperon is, we can infer some way that it might have gone into the water, and because of that inference, that means it's now looking more likely that somebody was still in control of the plane when it crashed. So, who was in control of the plane? The million-dollar question. Let's talk about some theories.
I reckon it's remote controlled.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with that, because that's quite interesting. So hijacked by remote. Now, something that I was finding out about when researching this, again, this was not something that I knew before, although I'd heard the hijacked by remote theory. Now, Boeing, the company who made the aeroplane, they are an American company. And since 9/11, because of that plane being hijacked, the Boeing have been experimenting with trying to get technology where the plane can be taken over remotely by someone else to stop something like 9/11 happening. Just, if it looks like it's going to be flown into a building, they can take charge of it and fly it somewhere else. However, Boeing say that they haven't completed that technology, and that's not fitted on any of their aeroplanes, retrofitted on any of them. It would have to be with this particular aeroplane.
Thing is, though, got a question for you, Matt. If you had a brand new technology that you were testing for the first time, and it was also like a terrorist theft proof kind of technology, would you announce that you had that on the plane?
No, you wouldn't, because then all the terrorists would be going, right, let's learn how to hack this.
Yeah, let's learn how to hack that.
Yeah. In the same way that when we were talking earlier about the military radar and why they didn't disclose what they'd seen at the time, was because they didn't want other countries to know what technology they had. And, it could be exactly the same reason with this. You don't want potential enemies of your state knowing that they could control all of your aeroplanes.
Yeah, exactly.
And fly them about. So
we just hacked into this thing remotely and used some wireless technology, and then we flew it around for a bit. If people knew they could do that, then that would be quite bad, I think.
Well, indeed. So that's, out of all the conspiracy theories around it, I think that's the only one where I'd say, yeah, I could potentially believe in that.
Well, they always do that though. These governments and things, don't they? They always go, oh, we've got. It's 2020 and we've got 2025 technology. It's like, well, no, you've not got 2025 technology. It's like, you've got today's technology, and in 5 years' time, like, we'll let you use it at exorbitant prices if you really wanted to. That's usually what it is. Like,
who knows? Yeah, they might already have that technology, and they don't want to share it with anyone.
Well, in the news recently,
like, remember the Cold War?
In the news recently, an ex-Israeli sort of minister said that the US and various countries around the world are in touch with a galactic federation of aliens. So who knows? Who knows what technology those aliens have given us? The ability to remotely pilot planes is probably out there.
That seems like, of all the things they could give us, that seems like quite a crap one.
Well, yeah, it's pretty mundane, isn't it? But I think if you want to keep yourself secret, which apparently they do, because they think that we'd all freak out if we knew they existed. You'd want to sort of do it in increments. So the idea that Mork could take control of the ship and fly it around, control of the plane and fly it around.
Maybe that's what was happening. Maybe these aliens were in touch with the US government at the time, going, look what we could do with a plane that your aeroplane company has made.
We made a mistake, guys. Sorry, took control of the wrong one.
I've accidentally killed everyone on board. I didn't realise that would happen. Actually, I'll just fly it over the Indian Ocean, just let it crash. That's fine.
So what you're saying is, some aliens were showing Obama how to use it. Hey, Obama, look how I use this technology.
Thanks, Obama. It's all Obama's fault.
Well, yeah, Donald Trump's been like, he's bad. He's a criminal. Lock Hillary Clinton up. Like, maybe he knows it. Maybe he knows stuff that, like, he's not been letting on. I don't know what they've been up to.
Who knows? To be a fly on the wall in the White House.
Yes.
We mentioned aliens. Let's have a look at some of the other daft theories. There's the black hole theory. Basically got shut down straight away, and then, as is the way these days, as soon as you shut something down, people will go, but what about this? How do we know that that's how it works? But so the black hole theory was that the plane just flew into a black hole.
Yeah, a black hole just opened up and sucked the plane in. However, the problem with that theory is that if a black hole, the way they described, did open up, it would also suck in most of the surrounding solar system. Yeah. At the very least. So
I mean, the plane wouldn't have been any differently affected to everyone else on the Earth at the time.
Because that's a big problem with CERN. That's a big concern with CERN. They think if they're it's a concern with CERN. Yeah, if they keep bobbing quarks around at near light speed and smashing them into one another to see what will happen, and all these like atomic particles to see what will happen, there's the very big concern they could just open up a black hole and just suck the whole planet into a black hole and just.
Well, maybe we should do an episode on that at some point, because basically that can't happen either. What they're doing at CERN, that happens in our upper atmosphere all the time, and so like tiny black holes are made, but they're not stable enough to actually do anything. They just collapse under their own weight, basically.
Well, I guess one of the concerns with the black hole theory here as well is that because the idea is that it either gets sucked into a black hole and just compressed into nothing, or potentially gets sucked into an alternative universe or somewhere else entirely in the universe.
A wormhole or some sort of portal, yeah.
But if that was the case, then why would the flaperon be found?
I guess maybe they got sucked into a portal that opened up somewhere in the Indian Ocean.
They got sucked into it just appeared under the ocean, on the ocean floor, and the flaperon was.
Yes. I mean, I said it was a daft theory.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, that would be very unlucky.
Let's go back to the conspiratorial ones. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of people at the time posited that the plane had gone to Diego Garcia, which is a US Air Force base on the island of the same name. And I think the island is a British overseas territory, actually, but the US have an Air Force base.
Probably. I didn't look into that. But yes, there are lots of tiny little islands around the globe which are owned by the US. Well, the US are really interesting, aren't they? Because they don't really colonize places in the same way that other superpowers colonize places. Well, they don't take over. They just go,
They came to the party later than everyone else.
Yeah, so the way they do it is they go, we're just going to... Hey guys, we're going to come along and we're going to protect you. And the way we're going to protect you is we're just going to plonk a military base in the middle of your lands, and then you're protected. It's like, what are you going to do while you're there? Well, we might go do invasions of Iraq and stuff like that. Maybe.
Yeah.
The idea behind this Diego Garcia is that either it was remote controlled there. I don't know why they would want a passenger plane to land at Diego Garcia. Hey, well, you guys were going to go to Beijing, but actually, like, you're in Diego Garcia for a party. Hey,
come to the beach.
Some margaritas and some, what are those necklaces called that they wear in Hawaiian? Whenever you go to Hawaii, they give you like a necklace of flowers.
Yeah.
I don't know what the name is. But yeah. It's
I can't remember what the name is, actually.
Come out to our luau. Like, no. So it's either that they were remote controlled there for nefarious purposes, or it was hijacked and they were trying to, some terrorists for whatever reason were trying to like blow up Diego Garcia 9/11 style.
So I think neither of those theories are particularly likely, but the latter is the more likely one. Interestingly, MH370 had Diego Garcia in its list of places you could fly to on autopilot. So
did it?
Yeah.
I haven't read that. So
I mean, basically, like aeroplanes will have a lot of airports in their autopilot system in case they need to make an emergency landing. If they're so like, a lot of like smaller island airports where if you're traveling across the ocean, say if they were going from Malaysia to somewhere in Africa, then that would be the kind of thing where if you need to make an emergency descent on a small island airport and you're out of air traffic control kind of thing to say that's what you're going to do, then you can have the autopilot on. Instead of being told where's the nearest airport, you can then just switch over if you need to make an emergency landing.
Okay.
But I mean, Diego Garcia is nowhere near where the flight path of the plane.
Well, yeah.
Where it's just nowhere near Kuala Lumpur or Beijing. Anyway, is what I mean.
Yeah.
So it would have had to
Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam. It's basically a
yeah.
straight dart up the coastline essentially to get to Beijing. So it's very odd that they sort of didn't. Make it.
So I mean, Diego Garcia is just about the limit of where they could have reached with the fuel that they had, and the idea was that the plane got there, and then the US Army, fearing rightly or wrongly that they were going to be attacked, shot it down.
Because there were some sightings of planes overhead in that region.
Yeah, I mean it's all anecdotal, so I don't really know. I don't know how much credence to give that.
Well, this is the thing, because there's a lot of private jets that fly around that area as well. So like from the ground, you see a jet of some kind in the sky, especially the night sky. You see a jet, and you don't know what kind of. Also, who can identify planes at like 6 a.m? I'm not.
Well,
I'm not paying attention.
I suppose, if you've just briefly seen a plane, you might not know what a passenger jet looks like.
Yeah.
Especially if you live on tiny islands in the middle of nowhere where you're not going to get that many flying overhead.
But if you hear like a Boeing 777 has gone missing, and you go, well, I saw a plane. Oh yeah, was it? It was flying pretty low. Oh yeah, was it a Boeing 777? I don't know.
Yeah, quite.
There were people on it. It was flying overhead, doing what planes normally meant to do.
Yeah.
But maybe that's your missing plane.
Even though you and I live quite close to an airport, I wouldn't be able to identify what kind of plane was flying overhead. I like to think I'd be able to identify if it was a commercial flight or like a small jet or something.
Yeah.
But even so, I mean, I've never tried to do it, so I don't know. They might all look the same to me.
This is it. I mean, like, I know that some of them have propellers on. I'm pretty good at identifying planes with propellers. The
reason this probably didn't happen, well, there's two reasons. Firstly, the wreckage that was found has no evidence of there having been an explosion. So if it had been shot down, then the wreckage would have suffered serious kind of burns and warping from an explosion that would have done that.
So from a lot of stuff that I've read and looked at, like, a lot of aviation experts say, look, like normally in these situations you would have millions of pieces of debris in the ocean floating around, and like we've scoured the whole of the Indian Ocean looking for it, Southern Indian Ocean looking for this plane. And that we found a flapper and we found a few items, but normally in all these places, so Reunion Island should have been like littered with like bits. In Australia, Perth should have been littered with debris.
Well, exactly. I mean, that gives credence to the theory that it was flown deliberately into the ocean in a way that meant it would stay more or less in one piece. Because that's even on the scale of the Indian Ocean. Like, if a plane dramatically hit the ocean so that it fell apart like that, there should have been pieces everywhere, and it should have been easy to see them. Because that's how they found Air France flight. They knew it had gone missing somewhere between Brazil and Cape Verde, on just on the west of the West African coast. And I think it took them like a day or two to start seeing pieces. It took them ages to find the actual plane itself, but because there was so much debris. I mean, the Atlantic Ocean's pretty big, and they didn't know where it had gone down. They just knew that it had gone missing somewhere between Brazil and, and the west of Africa.
They had less, didn't they have less like flight recorded data than they did with MH370?
Well, yeah, I mean, they weren't even, nobody realised that Air France flight was missing for hours. And yeah, so they had a much bigger area to look at, really, because they didn't have all of this data, and they managed to find debris very quickly because there was so much of it. And that's one of the weird things about this flight, is that there isn't that much debris. So yeah, if it had been shot down, there'd be a lot more debris. The other reason it's unlikely to have anything to do with Diego Garcia is because whether they did it rightly or wrongly, if the US military shot down a plane that was heading for a military base, they would probably make that public to show terrorists that they weren't going to be able to do that. Yeah. Show anyone that's trying to attack them, just like, you're not even going to get close, mate.
We've shot it. But then it's tough, isn't it? Because the whole thing about that is with the flight path that plane was taking, it was going past a lot of nations and pinging off a lot of nations' sort of radars and things like that. So you don't know what kind of tensions were sort of being built up by that whole thing, especially if it's an unidentified commercial jet. You're like, I don't know.
Let's move on to another conspiracy theory. So there's the Freescale staff. 4 US passengers each had a 20% stake in a microchip patent. They all worked for this company, Freescale, and the company had the other 20% stake. And so the theory is that the company somehow managed to deliberately crash the plane so that it would get 100% of the stakes in this patent. However,
they definitely do that. Shareholders would definitely do that.
They would definitely do that. However, I can tell you that they definitely didn't, because legally that's not the way the rights work. So those 4 people, their share of that patent has, I don't know who it's gone to specifically, presumably next of kin for all of them, but it hasn't gone to the parent company anyway.
Well, have we checked what their will was and who it was going to do? Because shareholder number 5, Mr. Jenkins.
Well,
my boss, Mr. Jenkins, is getting my 20% shares in this company.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, the other thing is like, well, how would this company bring down a plane?
Well, I mean, the remote control thing. Have you ever seen any of the white hacker conferences on like YouTube? Have you seen any of that?
No, I haven't actually.
The stuff that they can do, they go, oh yeah, we figured out how to hack into like a BMW with like an internal car, and we can actually slam the brakes on and like crash a car, or like slam the accelerator on, and
Jesus, really?
Or just like stop the locks from working. Like, they can hack into like people's pacemakers and stop pacemaker from working. Yeah, exactly.
That's frightening.
It is frightening. Like, you know, the amount of things that people can do with like technology these days is insane, and like it makes me very angry because I can't do anything with technology. I
couldn't even get your printer to work.
I bought a wireless printer today. I spent all day trying to get the wireless printer to work. Back in the day, you used to just plug in the printer and then the printer would just print off. Now this printer's like, hey, like, how about you make an account with HP so we can know what you're printing off? Like, why do you want to know the sort of script that I'm trying to print off for this podcast? Yeah, but we want to know. How about joining the cloud? You want to join the cloud, don't you? Everybody wants to join the cloud. No, I don't want to join the cloud. Okay, I just want to print off the paper. Oh, printer not working. User initiative like required. What do you mean by that? I'm not going to tell you. People in the know can do all kinds of manners of wonderful things, including making
printers work.
Yeah, printers work. So. You know, if someone can make a printer work, I'm sure they could crash a plane.
Well, something else remote hijackers could have done is to send the plane to the Kazakhstan Cosmodrome I was about to say in Russia, but obviously it's in Kazakhstan. Why would they do this? Well, there are links to MH17. The day that MH370 vanished was the day after some US sanctions had been placed on Russia, and top Russian politicians said that there would be a boomerang effect. And the same thing happened the day before MH17, which was another Malaysian Airlines flight, another Boeing 777. It sort of disappeared mid-flight. We actually know what happened to that one. It got shot down over Ukraine by, it was over the Crimea by people who wanted the Crimea to be part of Russia.
Yes.
It was a sort of a militant group who apparently hadn't been trained very well and just shot down a passenger plane. And again, for people who've apparently not been trained very well, they were quite successful in shooting something down. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So I'm not sure. I mean, that's what
they've not been trained very well, but it was a bullseye.
I can't remember if it was Putin himself or just another high-ranking Russian official, but yeah, they said the same thing about a boomerang effect, and that was the day after more US sanctions were placed on Russia because of the annexation of Crimea.
I mean, you can't trust what Putin says, though. Putin's like, oh, yeah, it's terrible. Look at all these things that are happening. How is that happening? Because you want them to. Vladimir, you're quite a powerful individual who likes judo and riding horses, and bare-chested. With his beautiful chest out.
Yeah. There's little proof of there being a significant link between the two planes, apart from the fact, they're both from the same airline. They're both Boeing 777s, and they both went missing the day after Russian politicians said something quite ominous. However, there's physically, there's no real link between the two planes. I mean, the fact that MH17 was shot down and its wreckage was found, and they found the bodies of people on there. People say that might have actually been MH370 instead, and that MH17. But I mean, what I fail to understand about that is why would they not just claim to have crashed two planes rather than trying to switch one with the other? That doesn't make any sense.
You've got that, and you've also got this MH17, which has gone missing. That's not the wreckage that we found. The MH17, which we found a wreckage where MH17 should have been, but it's actually MH370, which should have been somewhere completely different. It's like an MH17 is the one that's gone missing somewhere. It's like, come on, this happens sometimes with conspiracy theories. They just added steps. You're like, well, let's just logically think this through. That doesn't make sense as to how that would happen and why that would happen. I could go with the idea that they have some link to them somehow, that there was tensions that were pretty high. And maybe even America were like, oh God, maybe this flight has gone the wrong way and it's all gone wrong. And, it's maybe something to do with the Russian attack or something like that. I could quite believe that the Americans might have shut it down for that reason. But just saying, oh yeah, it was flying in a place that it shouldn't have been flying. And another plane's been missing where it should have been.
It's beyond the bounds of reason, really. There are two more theories that I want to talk about.
Okay.
One of them is the big one. However...
One of them is the big one.
The big one. I've got a whole 2 pages in my notebook about that one.
Excellent.
The other one is quite simple. So there's the idea that a fire was started on the plane somehow. Now, the flight had a cargo of lithium-ion batteries, which can cause quite severe fires. In the air, a UPS flight in 2010 crashed over, I think it was over Saudi Arabia, somewhere, because a fire had been started by, they had 80,000 lithium-ion batteries in their cargo. One of them caught fire, and then, it just destroyed the rest of them. They all caught fire and basically just destroyed all the mechanical.
Well, I'm fairly sure that happened to a British Airways flight as well. It didn't crash, but I think on the runway, some of the batteries caught fire on the runway, and they had to evacuate the plane. And,
was that at Manchester Airport?
Yeah. And they had to evacuate the plane, and everyone's like, yeah, it's bloody awful. The whole cabin just filled up with smoke in no time at all.
So obviously, didn't people it took people a while to get off the plane? So a lot of people just ended up dying on the plane because they couldn't get out in time. Yeah.
So these things can happen very quickly, and obviously they explode. So the problem is that when you've got batteries tightly packed together and one starts exploding, then they all start popping.
Exactly. So the idea of why this might have happened and nobody made any contact, it is possible that the fire and explosion, might have destroyed something that connected the transponder to everything else, and that's why that was shut off. And then the erratic movements of the plane afterwards could have been the pilots attempting to bring the plane around.
There is one problem with that theory, though, which is that I think it's no plane has ever been in the air for longer than 30 minutes with a serious fire on board.
Quite. So the idea that plane
was on fire for a long time and managed to fly for 8 hours.
It's unlikely, but I thought that would be a bit of a nice one because that doesn't mean that anyone's really to blame. Well, apart from the idiot who put all them lithium-ion batteries on it.
Well, this is a good point, folks. Don't put your lithium-ion batteries in your hold-all luggage. Take it with you in your hand luggage.
Yeah.
So that's why you're meant to do it. You're meant to take your laptops and your dildos and those things and put them in your hand luggage.
Why would that make a difference, though?
Well,
are they less likely to explode if you do that?
Well, no. It's for one thing. If your lithium-ion battery catches fire.
Oh, you can just put it out.
Yeah, there's people there who go, there's a fire that's just started here.
Yeah.
So we can actually do something about that.
Whereas if it's in the hold, then you're not going to know.
Exactly. So it's quicker to detect fires if the thing that might catch fire is in or where people are. It sounds counterintuitive, but actually it makes more sense to have it there for safety reasons.
Yeah. I suppose it's not the kind of thing that you'd ignore.
Exactly. I knew I was expecting hot weather where I was going, but these are getting toasty already.
So let's talk about the the main theory that people have at the moment as to what happened with the plane, even though it's not a particularly watertight theory, it's still kind of the most likely out of everything we've got. So that's the idea that MH370 was a murder-suicide by, or at least by somebody who knew how to fly a plane.
Pilot or the co-pilot.
Yeah, the pilot or the co-pilot, or somebody else on the plane who knew how to fly a plane like that. Apparently there was another passenger who had it was like a flight engineer or something, although they didn't have any experience of flying Boeing 777s, which, because they're big planes, like you would need the experience to be able to make those maneuvers that it did. So probably not that passenger. So yeah, either the pilot or the co-pilot, unless somebody was taking Boeing 777 flying lessons without anyone's knowledge.
Well, I mean, you can buy a simulator.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're going to get onto simulators shortly, I'm sure.
We are.
But, like, yeah, everybody can buy a simulator these days. And also, you can get YouTube videos full of, information on all the inner workings of the plane. So I suppose if you watched a lot of YouTube videos and made a lot of notes, perhaps you could do some simple maneuvers.
Well, yeah.
I've played on flight simulators. I'm rubbish at them, so it can't be me. But, it's somebody else.
I mean, to be honest, we're told it's not that easy, but then maybe we're all told that so that we don't
think,
so we don't,
it
would be a good idea. Let's go and hijack the plane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're taking this flight to Mexico.
Yeah.
This is a Ryanair flight, sir. We're going to Dublin. We don't have enough fuel to get to Mexico.
I'm going to Mexico. That's where I'm going. There were two pilots. One of them, because the plane flew for so long and so deliberately, it's unlikely that both pilots were in agreement on what they were doing, especially if it was a murder-suicide. So it's most likely that only one pilot was in the cockpit once the transponder was turned off. Something else to back this up is that the German Wings flight, which one was it? What was it called? I have it here somewhere. German Wings flight 9525 from Barcelona to Dusseldorf, that was deliberately crashed by the co-pilot who... I think he'd failed a medical recently because he was suicidal and he was claiming that he couldn't see properly. And yet he decided not to disclose this to his employers because for some mad reason, if you're a pilot and you get told you can't fly, it's up to you to tell the airline that you can't fly. So that was, but yeah, anyway.
If you weren't already terrified of flying from this podcast enough.
Well, I think that has changed now because of that crash. But what he did basically was he told the captain, said, "Oh, do you want to go to the toilet now?" But before we make the descent, and the captain was like, "Yeah, good idea." He went out, and then the co-pilot just
locked the door
behind him, so the captain couldn't get back in. Again, that's a safety feature that's been added since 9/11, so that the cockpit door cannot be opened by unless you're inside the cockpit.
Have you ever flown on a plane pre 9/11 where you could see the cockpit?
I mean, I have seen the cockpit in planes.
I never got to go in one in the air. I was really jealous of that. I always heard.
I've never been allowed to go in one, but I mean, I have seen the inside of a cockpit on a plane post 9/11. Just when the captain or co-pilots come out, and I've been waiting for the toilet, and they've said, "I need to go to the toilet now because I want to land the plane."
Yeah,
and I've been able to see in the cockpit just for a few seconds.
Yeah, but I've seen, because back in the day, man, the door would just be open sometimes, just for extended periods of time. They just leave it open. It doesn't matter one way or the other. So yeah. You'd see the pilot doing his thing. 9/11 really spoiled a lot of fun, didn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a bit of an understatement. But yes, you can say that. So Zaharie Ahmed Shah, who was the captain of this flight, he seems to be the more likely candidate. We discussed at the beginning of the episode that the co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid, He was 27. He was going to get married, and this was also supposed to be his final training flight before he would then get his captain's license.
Yeah, his captain's license, his full career. He had everything to live for.
The idea that it would be like there's no evidence at all from his behaviour or anything happening in his life that he would have any desire to crash the plane. Interestingly, there's not that much for Captain Shah either. Now, remember that German Wings flight pilot. There was a lot in his behaviour, once it was investigated, there was a lot in his behaviour to show that this guy should never have been allowed to fly a plane.
Yep.
With Captain Shah, there's basically nothing. His behaviour didn't change. He didn't change his spending habits. He didn't really do anything out of the ordinary or anything to suggest that something had happened to him that had changed his mood, that had changed him mentally. However, there are reports that his wife left him, and that he was having an affair, which was broken off just before takeoff. But these things have never been proven, and his family have strongly denied.
Have you seen the interview with his brother-in-law?
I have not.
The interview with his brother-in-law is amazing because his brother-in-law is literally just like, why would he do this? He's like, because apparently, according to his brother-in-law, apparently his wife would go to stay with family every time he was flying. So every time he was flying, she would take the kids, because there's reports that she'd taken the kids that day, and that's maybe one reason why. But apparently, she would just go to family anyway. And the interviewer asked him specifically, the brother-in-law asked him specifically about, well, what happens if he was seeing a mistress? He's like, well, it doesn't matter because he's Muslim, so he can have up to 4 wives. It's allowed. Like,
yeah. Well, I think the thing about that was that the affair was broken off. Was what he received a phone call 20 minutes before the flight took off. Apparently,
Well, who phoned him?
Well, that's it. A mystery number,
a mystery
woman. I mean, you know, this was also on the 60 Minutes documentary, I think, and it's like, who called him? Who bloody called him? I bet it was a woman. It's bloody women's fault. That's what it is. So I was a bit Kiwi. That
was a bit Kiwi.
Bloody women. Bloody women. There's always a woman to blame.
Hey, we're phoning about your avocados, your avocado shipment.
Yeah.
The phone call could have been about anything, couldn't it? Not necessarily.
Indeed, yeah.
A tryst, anything tryst related.
Women have other reasons to call men other than to arrange to have sex with them or break off relationships. Even if I don't know if it's proven that it was a woman who phoned him.
Yeah,
it could have been anyone.
Could have been his mate.
Yeah,
could have been his mate. Could have been a car salesman.
Yeah. Interestingly, something else that could have affected his mood was that he was an avid supporter, and I think was maybe related to, or was he just a good friend of?
He was a friend of, yes. He was a friend of this
He was a friend
individual.
of an opposition leader in Malaysia who had been jailed on charges of sodomy, which being gay, which obviously is not illegal here. We are lucky to. So
was he? Sorry, I got because I didn't know this. Was he charged with sodomy, or was he charged with like some sort of homosexual related offence? Because they're quite different.
Are they?
Well, yeah. So in the US, in certain US states, sodomy is still illegal to this day.
So what is sodomy? How's that different?
Well, sodomy is just any sexual activity that isn't for procreation. As in, like, if you have oral sex, that's classed as sodomy. If you have anal sex, that's classed as sodomy. So, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be with a man. It can also be with a woman.
Okay.
I mean, I don't see why that would get reported anyway. But, yeah. So, it's not necessarily...
I got the feeling that it was more about...
Well, I mean, if you really... I mean,
same sex.
Yeah.
Sex.
If you really want to shame somebody in an Islamic world, that would definitely be one way of it. If you want to sort of, like, discredit their...
Yeah, I mean the charges are probably false anyway. There are also reports that Captain Shah, to bring us back to the podcast.
Yes,
there are also reports that Captain Shah had no social engagements after March the 8th.
Oh, so he hadn't got anything in the diary. It wasn't that like the plane went missing and then he didn't show up to any of his appointments. He had all these appointments booked in, didn't show up. What a coincidence!
I mean, obviously it's the former. He didn't have anything in the diary, is what's said, but it's also reported that he booked a dentist appointment. So, I mean, only one of those two things can be true. Either he didn't make any appointments or he did make appointments.
Schrodinger's, well, you know, I don't know how dentistry works in Malaysia, but it's not great here, is it? Schrodinger's appointment. You do and do not have an appointment, sir. Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
So he became, when he became a suspect in the investigation, the Malaysian police seized his computer where he had his own flight simulator. And there are a number of unsaved data points. So like most of his routes had been saved, so it was just flying from A to B. He had a YouTube channel where he talked about his flight. You know, he showed how his flight simulator works. And talked about aviation. He was really passionate about it. However, weirdly, these data points, basically there were 2 in the Southern Indian Ocean, and then the other 4 were along kind of the Malaysian peninsula.
There's also some deleted data, so there's a lot of deleted data.
This is what I'm talking about. Yeah. So so it might have been deleted rather than unsaved. Interestingly, if you put a line through all of these points, then it goes remarkably similar to what authorities thought the final flight path might have been at the time, to the point where it actually influenced where they started looking for the plane. Now, the problem with this is that there's no way of knowing whether they were all from the same session. They might not have been. And all of these data points as well.
So what you're trying
they did end in airports or on like small runways.
So what you're trying to say, Matt, is that like it could have been like, well, look at how he's flying between all these different fly zones. So he's like seems to be like deliberately sort of going between these fly zones. You could say that was on the flight simulator, but then the next journey that sort of turns out into the Indian Ocean, that might not have been on.
Yeah, that might have been from a different session.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It might well be. I mean, it is a bit coincidental that the line through those data points does look very similar to the supposed flight path of the plane. But yeah, that does not mean that was what he intended to do.
Yeah, well, think about it this way though. Like if you've got a job, and even if you really love your job, so you really love your job, it's like the best thing ever. Like, would you then go, all right, I've finished work for the day. I finished like an 8-hour flight. Had an 8 to 12 hour flight today. Done that. Go home. What are you going to do? I'll just relax with an 8-hour flight at home. Like, like, who actually does that? Like, I could well believe that somebody I'll just practice this.
I think the idea
bit.
is that he skipped through it, although I don't know what evidence there is to suggest that he did that either.
Yeah.
After investigating this, the Malaysian police then later said that they couldn't find anything of interest within the data. So they published that they looked at this data and said they couldn't find anything of interest, which would suggest that they'd investigated it and decided that they couldn't use that data to assume anything about the flight.
Think about it this way, right? Think about it this way. So you've had your opposition candidate like sent down to prison, possibly on false charges, possibly that as the government you've possibly sort of had this happen on false charges. You've then caused somebody who knew that person to go insane and kill himself, and 239 people?
Yeah, there were 237 people in total.
Yeah, 237. So yeah.
So we're 236.
So 236 people takes 236 people with him. You realise that you've done that and it's a massive outrage and problem. Maybe they didn't find the flight. Maybe that's it. Maybe they didn't find the flight, but they did find that like he probably caused that. Would you actually announce that information? You'd probably just go,
well, I mean, if that was the case, why did they announce anything about the data points at all?
Good point. Well, maybe it's just a bluff. Maybe it's like, hey, we did find this out, but we don't know why. My view of lying is that you always tell as much truth as you can do to get away with a lie. That's it. If you're going to lie well.
Yeah, that is true. But then you don't need to offer up bits of truth that you don't need to. It's a bit like an Ian Huntley kind of thing. Ian Huntley was the Soham murderer.
He was the
But yeah, the reason he got caught was he kept appearing in front of the cameras, trying to help with supposedly trying to help with the investigation, like to a weird extent where he kept getting himself so involved in it that the police then started looking into him, and that's how they found out he'd done it. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't have been on their radar if he hadn't done that. So I wonder, like, similar thing. You don't need to start making things public if you want to hide some of that thing that you're going to make public. It probably won't help you.
But maybe the Malaysian government were like, this will be a conspiracy theorist's wet dream for years to come. And therefore, if we release some information, then people will just quibble about it. And then there'll be so many different points that nobody will know what the actual truth ever is. I suspect MH370 is on the moon, like the Daily Star announced. That's just zapped into a black hole and just appeared on the moon.
On the moon.
I love that
everything
stuff.
Except the flaperon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the flaperon fell off.
Bit of a casing of a TV.
It's still my favourite thing. Like, there's a plane that's gone missing, and the Daily Star just goes, "It's on the moon. Here's a Photoshop photo picture showing it there." Like, yeah.
I mean, to give more credence to the theory that Shah was intending to bring the plane down and kill everyone on it, including himself, was that when the plane flew, after it had flown over the Malaysian peninsula into the Strait of Malacca, it then made a slight right turn around the island of Penang. A British pilot named Simon Hardy claimed on this same Australian documentary that I'm probably referencing far too much, he claimed that that looked to him like somebody looking down at Penang, at the island of Penang, and that's where Captain Shah is from. So he might have been having a last look at his hometown, although it was the night and it was dark, so how much he'd have been able to see, who knows. But again, curious that the plane did that because it makes it look like somebody was looking at that island, which Captain Shah would have had a reason to do.
So one final salute to the place of his birth before heading off into the sunset.
Yeah. There is another possibility that he didn't actually intend to commit suicide. It is possible that he was trying to fly in a kind of arc outside of radar area,
right,
and without doing too significant of a turn to be noticed by the Inmarsat data. And he was trying to fly to Christmas Island and then would, once he'd landed there, then announce his demands. Or when he was going to land there, announce his demands.
So
ran out of fuel before. So Christmas Island's just north of Australia. Basically.
And does it have that's not the one with the heads on it?
No, that's Easter Island.
So is
Christmas Island's the one with the crabs that they have this migration and they are like bioluminescent.
Do they have statues of bums sticking out the ground? There we go.
Lovely.
Such a lovely image, stone bums.
I mean, again,
so you think he was a crab fanatic?
No. I mean, he might have been. Say, this was in protest against the opposition leader being jailed. It might have been a case of, right, I'm going to hijack this flight. My demands for the safe return of everyone on board will be to this guy must be freed, and he was trying to fly to Christmas Island to do that.
How far away is Christmas Island from Malaysia, though?
It's close enough that he probably thought he could get there.
If you give me a moment, dear listener, I'm just going to take my phone off
Christmas
flight
Island
mode.
is basically in between. It's to the north of Australia and to the south of Indonesia. So it's kind of off the northwest coast of Australia. Mm-hmm. So I mean, he could have got there by sort of flying in a big old arc and then tried to land on Christmas Island, but he could have it's just about on the limits of where he could have reached. So the plane could have ran out of fuel at that time, and it could have landed there, and people haven't searched for the plane in that location. So that would also make sense as to why the flaperon was in one piece, because he'd have probably been trying to, when the plane ran out of fuel, he'd have been trying to glide it to get to Christmas Island, but found that he'd done his calculations wrong, or it was just too far away.
Sadly, Google Maps won't allow me to see the distance between the two because it says it can't work out a route for me to walk between Kuala Lumpur Airport and Christmas Island. It says it's not possible.
Unless you're Jesus.
It's
not going to be possible.
The thing about that, though, is
it's not the most direct way of going there, but the route that was supposed this, but it is a way of going there where he wouldn't have been seen on radar.
Do you think that's likely, though? Do you think that's likely?
I don't know.
Well, because when you think about it, he's an experienced pilot. There's about 8 hours worth of fuel on this plane, and he's flying around 8 hours.
Yeah.
It seems like a bit of a risky maneuver for someone just wanting to make a political statement.
Well, indeed,
for a man who,
but then his friend had been jailed.
Yeah, I know.
A few hours before. Yeah. It's not like he had a load of time to prepare for this. If that was the reason.
Yeah, but you just fly it to my mind. You just fly it to, I don't know, Diego Garcia or Diego Garcia even. Or you fly it there, you fly it to Diego Garcia, or you fly it to somewhere closer. Like you take it to Hanoi Airport instead of Beijing, and you go, why have you landed in Vietnam? I'm making a protest.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, why not land at any other airports? Why go through this whole smoke and mirrors thing?
You could literally just land it anywhere, and you could go.
He could have, after locking the co-pilot out, he could have just said, "Hi Ho Chi Minh City Airport." I'm sorry, "Hi Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control."
Hi ho.
This is.
Hi ho. Hi ho. Ho Chi Minh.
This is Malaysian Airlines 370. I'm hijacking the plane, and I will land it safely once Anwar Ibrahim has been released.
Yeah, that's a much better way than doing it. We're going dark. Yeah. Like, if you're gonna, this is the thing. So this is the reason why they don't think it might be hijackers either. Because if you're gonna do something, if you're gonna make a political statement, you make a political statement. This is why terrorists might not be likely as well. Because it's like, well, if you're gonna do something, you want to claim responsibility for it. Nobody came forward to say they'd done. So
exactly. I mean, I suppose the only reason would be that if whoever was flying the plane wanted to make their point after landing it, but crashed the plane and died and was never able to make their point.
It just doesn't sound like a sensible strategy, though, does it?
No. Yeah, precisely. Yeah, like why waste time prattling about potentially crashing the plane when you could submit your demands earlier on? Yeah.
He could have literally submitted his demands at 1:21 when it went dark. Could have just been like, "These are my demands, mate." What time did the flight take off again? Was it 20? It
was cleared for takeoff at 46 minutes past midnight. Cleared for takeoff at 42 minutes past midnight, and at 1:22 it disappeared from radar screens.
So around 1:21, that surely would be the point where you're like, "Oh, I've got demands."
Yeah.
And if you don't give me those demands, you're not getting the plane back. Click.
Yeah.
Or slightly.
Well, I suppose the thing is, at that point they would still know where the plane was, so maybe he was intending to fly so that they didn't know where he was anymore before making his demands, so they couldn't just go, "Oh, actually, we can get the plane back, I think you'll find."
Yeah.
But like you said, it's not particularly likely. I mean, if we use the Occam's razor thing, there are so many assumptions that you have to make about about that it makes that theory unlikely. It is more likely that it was a suicide attempt and he just wanted to fly the plane somewhere where it couldn't be found. Although the one thing I find difficult with that, though, is that there's killing yourself because you're depressed, and there's doing something as dramatic and narcissistic as flying a whole plane full of people out into the middle of nowhere in Craskets and no one can find it. So I find it very odd that if he was going to do something so narcissistic, he wouldn't want people to know that he'd done it.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite, because it's a horrible thing to have happen. Like, you taking 236 other people with you.
Yeah,
it's dreadful because, like, obviously that's not just their lives ruined, but it's all their families who don't know what's happened, and it's a dreadful thing to sort of happen. The mystery in and of itself, just these people going missing, is awful. But to think that the pilot did it because he was pissed off about something, he was like, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, that's not why people commit suicide. And
it is.
I think the other thing with that as well, like the German Wings flight, I think there was only like 10 minutes, maybe less, between that pilot locking the cockpit door. Sorry, the co-pilot locking the cockpit door and the plane crashing. Because he was just like, right, I'm just going to crash it into some mountains. Here we go.
So, well, this is another point.
So, to have Captain Shah flying the plane for another 7 hours, it's like that's not the kind of thing that suicidal people tend to do. It's like, why would you make it last so long?
It's really an interesting point as well, because I know that the doors to cockpits now have been reinforced, but just because they're reinforced doesn't mean that you can't break into it. It's not completely... Like, you could keep people locked out for a certain length of time, but over an 8-hour period, I'm sure that people banging away at the door would eventually get in. It's not completely impossible.
Well, I mean, he could have depressurized the cabin.
He could have depressurized the cabin. I mean, that is a possibility.
So let's talk about mobile phones, because this was something that came up a bit.
I'll put my phone back on flight mode, actually. That's a good idea. Back in airplane mode for the podcast about airplanes.
Indeed. So there were two things about mobile phones. Firstly, there was the idea that the co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid, that he made a phone call after the plane had gone missing. That's not actually true. It registered with a mobile phone terminal somewhere. So, if he left his phone on a seat or something in the cockpit, it just, it flew into somewhere that had a bit of phone signal and just logged on with the terminal to say, hello, I'm here. That was probably all that was. So that doesn't really mean anything.
Where would you...
people have said that he made a phone call or he sent a text or something, which is not true.
I mean, it must be quite hard to get a signal at 30,000 feet.
Yeah, but I mean, it can happen.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because having travelled around Southeast Asia, one of the things that I found is every time you landed somewhere new, you had to buy a new SIM card because your old SIM card wouldn't pick up any signal and it wouldn't...
Well, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do anything with your phone.
It would just ping off a tower or a satellite.
And that's probably what happened. It was just a thing saying, hello, I'm here. I'm an operating system on a phone that wants to log into your network, and the network just, could have said, well, you can't because you've got the wrong SIM card or whatever. But yeah, it's that ping.
How dare you? Yeah. How dare you try and make a phone call from our tower? Like you were not cleared for phone.
There's also people tried calling their relatives who were on the plane, and they did receive what are called ringbacks. So that's when you call a number and it doesn't go straight to voicemail. It rings for a bit before going to voicemail, which makes it seem like there's a phone on the other end that can be answered.
So I mean, it was already in the air, so that also means that maybe people had been taking their phones off of airplane mode to actually be in touch. Because if you phone while the phone's in airplane mode like mine, if you tried to phone me now, it'd just go straight to voicemail. There wouldn't be any. Yeah.
The fact that no passengers made an attempt to contact anyone outside is very curious, because it means that either they didn't know what was happening or they were incapacitated. And with the severity of the turn, you'd have thought maybe some people would have been confused, especially if the co-pilot had been locked out and was banging on the door. You'd probably at that point go, I should call my family and let them know what's happening.
Yes.
So nobody did that. So that's really strange. The whole thing with ringbacks is that actually, even if your phone's off or on flight mode,
right,
when you call another mobile phone, you're not actually directly calling the phone. You're calling a terminal or a satellite first, and then the information gets pinged around until it then requests the phone you're calling at the other end to send the information back. Now, because that can be quite a long process, I mean, a few seconds, but that's quite long for machines. Because it can be that amount of time before that happens, your phone could start doing the dial tone noise. before it actually knows about the information, because it's just saying, hold on, we're doing it. We're making the connections. We'll get back to you in a second.
Okay.
So that happens often enough that there is absolutely no proof that anyone's phones were able to receive calls.
So, Matthew, do you think that it's likely that it was like a suicide attempt?
I think all the other explanations just have too many reasons. There's too much kind of gymnastics with all the other reasons to make them fit. And I think with the pilot murder suicide thing, you don't have to stretch it about as much to make it fit things like it suits the information that we have, rather than trying to interpret the information that we have to make it suit something. Now, we don't have enough information to say definitively it is that. Mm-hmm. There's so much more information we could do with. And yeah, there are a number of strange things. It's like, why did nobody on the plane seem to react? Like they have phones and stuff in the cabin outside of the cockpit. So why did none of the crew try to contact air traffic control and request help? That was something they could have done. They didn't. Why did these things happen? Why did this plane fly out to not be found?
Maybe they put tranquilizers in the food and the booze.
Possible. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that would be quite hard to organise.
Not for a government who wants to distract from things. The Russians who want to distract from their little war in Crimea and Ukraine.
I mean, that's kind of why I wanted to cover the MH370, is because, like, if we use Occam's razor, the theory with the least amount of assumptions is usually the correct one. The least amount of assumptions are the maddest ideas. Mm-hmm. So, it's like, it was all being controlled by Russia, or, it was aliens, or it was a black hole. Like, these things, the thing that I hate when discussing unsolved mysteries is like just saying God did it or aliens did it or something like that, because it's a very easy way to just take something away from scientific ways of trying to determine what happens. So yeah, you can never disprove God, you can never disprove aliens, because the only way to know if there's aliens or God or whatever or not is if they come out and show themselves. If it's something more powerful than us anyway. So I don't like exploring that as a theory to anything, because we can't put any sort of proof in it. And I think bad theories are ones that you can't discredit. So I think these sort of catch-all theories, just like, well, it was some sort of divine intervention, whether from a deity or from aliens or from a government that are a lot more powerful than we the people realise. It's a crap theory. If
I mean, I get that, but
if you do that, because there's nothing you can do.
I think there's something suspicious about the government, though. I think the fact the military just allowed this plane to fly over their radar tower, directly over their radar, and then just glide out to sea without making any.
That is very interesting. That as well. So this is it. I have a real dilemma with this particular case. Is what I'm saying, because all of the more scientifically provable theories have so many holes in them that it's difficult to say that any of them really fit. So it's just like, well, there might well be some sort of conspiracy or something otherworldly about this.
Well, the defense minister in that 60 Minutes interview that you see, he gets interviewed and he's like, well, we wouldn't have shot it down. And they're like, what do you mean?
Nobody said anything about shooting it down.
Nobody said anything about shooting it down. Why would you say that? It's like, well, the Americans could shoot it down. Like, what? It looks really weird. It's like, why are you bringing up that information?
So yeah, to get us back towards the conspiracy theories, because I think this will be quite a nice place to end.
Yep.
Is a chap called Blaine Gibson, who had absolutely nothing at the time to do with the crash or disappearance. He is an American lawyer who has made it his mission to visit every country in the world. This man, he found about a third of all of the pieces of wreckage that we've got from MH370 today. So
he found. What do you mean he found them?
I mean, he literally went to the beaches and combed the beaches and found them.
So he found the flapper on Reunion Island. So how did that end up?
No, I don't think he found the flapper on.
Right, okay.
He found other pieces of the plane.
Right, okay.
Basically, because he knew about tides and currents and the kind of the
so
debris.
He's a lawyer that knows about tides and currents.
I think he's just really interested in geography. And
is he a surfer? I am the surfing lawyer.
I don't know, but he knew a lot about these things.
Okay.
And so he was one of the first people to start saying, well, we should look in Eastern Africa and the islands in the Western Indian Ocean,
Madagascar,
for these for these parts. And so we went to do that. I think the countries that he visited were like 170 something on his list. Now, how many countries there are in the world is...
So while he was on a backpacking jolly, he was also combing beaches for...
No, he wasn't.
Debris.
He deliberately went to comb the beaches for debris.
Okay.
I don't know where he was when MH370 crashed. He met a number of the people whose family had been on the plane. So he might have been in Australia, actually,
right?
Because I think he developed quite a close friendship with one of the Australian one of the families of one of the Australian passengers on board. He then sort of decided he wanted to go and visit some of these countries anyway, and he thought they were the most likely place to look for debris. So he just flew off there himself to go and look for it and go and find it and to try
and help. What would it be like to have
closure.
A lawyer's wage where you could just go? I'm just going to fly off there and go and do an investigation.
Indeed, yeah, he's clearly not a poor man. The reason I'm bringing him up now at the end, I mean, he seems like a super nice and interesting guy.
Well, yeah, if he's going to go out of his way to try and solve a mystery for families, I'm all on board for it.
So the reason I'm bringing this up at the end is that he has said that he's been receiving death threats on his phone. So he's like to the point of paranoia, where he swaps out his SIM cards everywhere he goes to avoid being tracked. Like, he keeps his plans as private as possible. He'll move at random. He'll go to places at random so that people can't create a pattern and think about where he's going to go next. So say he wanted to go say he was in England, he wanted to go from Manchester to London, and he wanted to stay overnight in Birmingham, then we could go, he's probably going to head to London the next day because that's the direction he's heading in. Like, what he would do is he'd probably go to Belfast, and then he'd go to Brussels, and then he'd go to Glasgow, and then he'd go to Newcastle.
Not a poor man.
Yeah, quite, yeah. But that's the kind of thing he's doing. He's just going to a lot of random places between A and B. He's a seriously paranoid guy now because he's been receiving death threats. I mean, seeing as he is going out of his way to try and help out the families, I don't think he's making it up for publicity. Whether these death threats are genuine or not, whether they're coming from the Malaysian government or just from losers or lunatics who think this is funny, I don't know. And he doesn't either, but I mean, he's taking them seriously, clearly. And again, yeah, if it's the Malaysian government who are looking pretty shady throughout all of this, who are giving him death threats, the question is, why? It might be as simple as just they didn't want to admit their airline had a pilot who could do something like crash a plane and kill over 200 people. It is pretty shameful.
Well, it's quite a PR disaster, really, isn't it?
So
you've had a flight that someone's been able
to
shut off all the safety features of the plane and then just do whatever.
And especially if they were somehow able to find out that it was about the treatment of Anwar Ibrahim, the opposition leader. Well, that's bad press.
But it is bad press. But I mean, even if it's just the company, if it's just a corporate thing, when you think about all the mistakes made by the corporation themselves, so like the ground staff, you had like Ho Chi Minh City and Kuala Lumpur Airport, and they just weren't communicating with one another. It's like,
well, actually, the thing is, this isn't Kuala Lumpur Airport's fault. They actually pretty much did everything right that they could have done. It was Ho Chi Minh City noticed the plane had gone missing. They took far too long to tell Kuala Lumpur what had happened. They should have told them after 5 minutes, and they waited 18, I think.
Terrifying. I've flown out of that airport. So
yeah. So they should let them know much. And the other thing was the Malaysian military with their radar.
Yeah, their radar.
MH370, and they didn't tell anyone who was looking for the plane in time.
Bye-bye. I'm waving, folks. Yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting that you can't see me. I'm waving into a Matthew. Bye-bye.
Yeah, waving at the plane as it goes by.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's Kuala Lumpur Airport and air traffic control. They didn't really do anything wrong. They did the best with what they were given. I mean, they did screw up the thing with the flight plans. They thought MH370 was airborne somewhere, and then they realised they were looking at the flight plan rather than where it actually was.
Yep.
So they ended up confusing the matter. But yeah, because everyone else had been so lax in contacting them and getting in touch with them, giving them the information that they needed, we could probably forgive them for doing that, because there was just a lot of confusion because everything was done so poorly. So I think Kuala Lumpur air traffic control, I do feel kind of sorry for them, because I think they're probably the least to blame out of all of this.
Okay. Sorry, Kuala Lumpur Airport ground staff. You did a good job. and I'm...
So, yeah. I mean, I think the idea that Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control were working with Ho Chi Minh City Air Traffic Control and the Malaysian military and the Malaysian government all to create a conspiracy theory is unlikely. However, it could be something that the Malaysian government know far more. Well, it seems that they probably do know more than they're letting on.
Well, yeah, I mean, if your government says to you, I'm going to tell you to jump, you normally say how high. Yeah, so...
Yeah, especially a government like in Malaysia.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those things that, in a lot of places, if you've got quite an authoritarian government or dodgy officials, powerful people telling you to do stuff, it's quite intimidating, and you probably just go along with it anyway, because life is good and people like breathing, so,
We can't say for certain. We can't really say at all what happened to this plane. We have absolutely no idea.
Tourism's the biggest industry in the world. So the tourism is the biggest industry in the world. So any tourist-related tragedy is taken very seriously by most nations, because obviously you don't want to lose business. You don't want people to stop coming, because it's a massive boost to the local economies of wherever they're going and things like that. Yeah. It's something that...
Yeah, so the Malaysian government and Malaysian Airlines trying to keep that under their hat after the fact does kind of seem...
It makes sense. I mean, these people have got a lot...
It's horrible, but it makes sense.
Millions of pounds, dollars, whatever your local currency is, riding on it.
Check out Blaine Gibson with his lawyer's salary flying all over the world.
Yeah, just
to find pieces of the plane. Yeah.
And getting death threats, possibly from the Malaysian Tourist Board.
Yeah. That's, they want to attract people like that, and not for the reasons of looking for parts of planes.
Yeah.
So I think throughout discussing all of this, we've sort of come to not necessarily a consensus, but we kind of got towards the area of what might have happened and why there's so much kind of obfuscation about this disaster. But yeah, until we find the plane, who knows? Like we can't really say what was going on. I think that's the thing. Even though we could get towards the what and the who, and the where and the when.
You sound like
we're never going to know the why.
You sound like a call center. You sound like I'm phoning Malaysian Airlines, like call center staff, and I'm like, "Hey, there's a problem with my flight. Where is it?" And you just go, "Well, sir, I don't know that information. It could have been any number of things that could have caused this. I can't tell you where your luggage is."
I'll put it together in a more succinct way. So, yeah, we've sort of managed to get towards a lot of the points into the vague area of what we think might have happened to this plane. But I think the one that still is really obscure is why.
Why?
If it was Captain Shah, or if it was remotely hijacked or whatever, why was this done? Why did this plane disappear? And until we find it, nobody knows.
But how there seems to be systemic failures on the part of various organisations.
Yeah. I mean, the reason that I've brought up so many legacy air disasters is because with all of these, like, air travellers got safer afterwards because an investigation has been done and they've understood the reasons for why it happened, and then put things in place to stop that happening on future flights. But again, without being able to find MH370 and understanding what happened to it and why it went down, that just can't be done. With
many
this plane.
aviation experts have said it's really terrible. Scary. Yeah, it's terrible this flight hasn't been found because it's a mystery. And in aviation, we don't want mysteries. We want to know for certainties what's happened so we can correct any errors that might occur. I mean, although hopefully, like communication between at least just between Kuala Lumpur Airport and Ho Chi Minh Airport air traffic control. I hope that those two things have neatened up.
Yeah, I think there might well have been an effort to improve that since this disaster. I mean, that was one of the things that they actually improved after the Air France crash, was because there was this huge zone they were flying over the Atlantic Ocean where they weren't in touch with anyone. There's now things put in place where the pilots have to get in touch when they're out of like normal radar zones with air traffic controllers somewhere at some time, so that if there's a problem, people on the ground know a lot quicker, so they can try and help. And I think again with MH370, that's a similar thing's been kind of put in. It's just like when somebody is supposed to sign over, you try and find out straight away why they haven't done it, rather than going, they're probably just a bit delayed for some reason, which seems to be the case with Ho Chi Minh. They just sort of like hoped that the problem would go away. Yeah. And not the plane. And they got it the wrong way around.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that, because I do want to see the Petronas Tower in Malaysia at some point in my life. So,
have you not? I thought you'd been to Malaysia.
I've been to the airport.
Oh, right.
So that's why I think it's probably quite depressing to think that the last hours of those poor people's lives was spent buying overpriced food on the food court in Kuala Lumpur Airport. Because I've been there and I've done that. I've bought overpriced food.
How was it as airports go?
It's okay. I slept on the floor because there was nowhere else to sleep. So I put my backpack behind my head and had a kip. They've got big old TV screens so you can watch movies. They've got like a movie sort of lounge. There's lots of Wi-Fi docks and things like that, so you can plug your phone in and charge your phone and your laptop. And so,
I mean, could you not see the Petronas Towers from? Because I mean, they're pretty tall. I mean, you wouldn't put them near the airport for obvious reasons. But I mean, if
you could do that. I didn't see them, and if that's possible, I'll feel a bit sad because obviously I'm in Manchester, England, not anywhere near Malaysia. Definitely can't see the Petronas Towers from here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like if you go up to Alderley Edge or something like, you can see Beetham Tower, which is the tallest building in Manchester. You can see that from, because like the rest of our buildings are quite squat, and there's this huge stick in the middle of it, and that's Beetham Tower, and like the Petronas Towers. I think for a while they were the tallest building in the world, weren't they? So yeah, they are huge.
But yeah, so I guess the other thing is that when you're in an airport, you don't really want to be going all around the airport because airports are massive and you don't want to get lost.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
especially when you're trying to get a connection to somewhere else, which is what I was doing. So
yeah, I was to be fair, I was thinking more about after the plane had taken off, looking out the windows.
Yeah, all I could see in the air, because I had a day flight. All I could see in the air was palm tree groves. Because where they grow for palm oil, so I thought it was a jungle, but it's actually just miles and miles and rows and rows of palm oil trees.
Fair enough. Well, hopefully you will be able to see the Petronas Towers one day,
and hopefully we'll find out what the mystery of MH370 actually is.
Which of those things will happen first? Get your bets in now.
I mean, I hope it's 370 gets sort of a conclusion. People deserve to know.
Well, quite, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone's actively looking for the plane at the moment, so I don't know.
That lawyer is.
Oh, well, I mean, he's looking for pieces of it. I mean, he's not trying to. Really, we need the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder to be able to determine what exactly was going on. And even then, I mean, I suppose it's unlikely that the pilot was narrating what he was doing as he brought the plane down. If indeed that's what happened. So we still might not understand the reasons for it.
Well, he was a YouTuber, so I'm guessing he's good at multitasking.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not saying he's not good at multitasking. I'm saying he probably didn't want to.
Yeah.
Like the German wings pilot, he didn't say anything after we locked the captain out of the pilot, out of the cockpit. Out of the pilot. Locked the pilot out of himself. I was going to say that's all we've got time for. But, I mean, we have time to kill. But that's all I want to talk about MH370 because this is the second time we've done it. And I think we've done it to death now. So we'll be back in 2 weeks when we talk about the Pusher, a Manchester legend, not and I don't mean legend in a good sense. He's a fucking legend. No, a sort of an urban legend.
An urban legend of Manchester. And theory that there might well be an unknown serial killer or killers out in Manchester.
Yeah, pushing people in our waterways.
So
yeah, that's home for AJ and I. So that will be interesting for us to talk about for that reason.
Yes.
And we will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, folks.